There are some fantastic FNaF fan games. When you think about examples, games like The Joy of Creation or Oblivious Casa come to mind. There are many passionate developers and even teams of developers that focus on making a FNaF fan game as polished and stunning as possible, even making some really unique and fun gameplay. It's the reason why we still talk about some of these games to this day. The Joy of Creation story mode released almost 8 years ago, and it's a prime example of an almost perfect FNaF fan game. Now, of course, you saw the title and thumbnail, so you know where I'm going with this. For every good fan game, there are hundreds of bad ones. This isn't, of course, to dunk on a lot of these. We all start somewhere, and you can't expect someone's first game to be perfect. Some of these games look really good, but play horribly, or even look really bad, but play really well. And there are some hilariously bad ones, such as The Return to Freddy's, which in the story has something called super cancer, and a guy literally slips on a bar of soap, slides into a springlock suit, and dies. Unironically, more insight to a game's lore than Scott could ever give. But what if I told you that I found the worst FNaF fan game of all time? Yes. Give me any other example and I will refute it and personally still believe that this one game is worse. The game that I'm talking about, it's a game called Thunder's Frenzy. Now, I might be a bit biased here. I guarantee that pretty much all of you have never heard of this game in your life, and the select few who have definitely know what I'm about to say. This is kind of because the developer of this game is actually me. I know that developers hating on their games is nothing new. Let me reassure you that this is a whole nother level of hatred. I despise this game, but it wasn't always like that. So let me tell you how I made this game in the first place. It all started back when I saw this very intriguing video I found on my feed by the Bones5. In this video, he describes what makes the Rat and Cat All Challenges mode so difficult, giving insight to just how crazy the world of FNaF Max modes are, and it really interested me. So much so that I wanted to make my own game that focuses around the challenge aspect of FNaF. But of course, as we'll come to see, developing a game while simultaneously not knowing a whole lot about how these challenges work leads to an absolute disaster. I made Thunder's Frenzy based on 10 of my friends who I've known for a while. Each of them has a recolor OC, which I made and put into the game with all their own unique mechanics. These mechanics had lots of flaws, but all in all were actually thought out pretty well. But the execution of them was just horrible. Let me quickly go over how each character works so that we know what we're working with here. This might seem like information overload, so if you want more insight, I made a full video on this absolute mess of a game and you can find it in the description. Alright, mechanics. Thunder will be like Funtime Freddy moving between sides. He'll crawl into a vent randomly and you have to use a keybind to stop him from getting through. Aiden will spawn opposite Thunder and will make your screen fade before jumpscaring you. Flashbang him to make him go away. If you flashbang Thunder instead of Aiden, you die. Firework and Fan will be in the left and right hallways and you need to close the door on them. If they sync up in the hallway, you need to use the alarm on one of them to get them out of sync with each other, otherwise you die. Bo Bear will spawn on either the left or right. If he says cake time, you have to place a cake on that side. But if he says knock knock, you have to place it on the opposite side. Jonathan will appear in his cove and will progress out. He'll stand on either the left side or right side before attacking. Then you have to close the door corresponding to that side. Because for some reason I made this game as annoying as possible, you have to close the door on the opposite side of him because the camera is mounted on the back wall, changing the perspective. Ultra is like Ballora, except he'll knock before attacking, which is your cue to shut the door. For whatever reason, he has a chance to play the knocking sound cue on the opposite side of him attacking, and if you close the door on the wrong side, you instantly die. G will spawn his cupcake and it will run across the screen. Click it or he kills you. G-Hawk is like Golden Freddy. If he's in your office, flip up the cameras to make him go away. Now finally, the worst mechanic, Goldie. At the beginning of the night, the 3 monitors in your office will display a bunch of different colors. Got them memorized? Good, because once you flip up the cams, they're gone forever. Now, once Goldie appears in the office and his eye color matches one of these colors, you have to click him. If it doesn't, you have to flip up cams. Do the wrong thing and you instantly die. Now that that's out of the way, you can see why this game became so flawed. To be honest, the base gameplay of all the characters isn't too bad. Sure, there are some situations that make the game harder or easier depending on the luck, but there is a general gameplay loop and I can only really describe it as vanilla sister location custom night. The mechanics revolve around RNG, but don't necessarily put you in unwinnable situations. What's that? Oh yeah, base gameplay. That's right. For whatever reason, I decided to add a bunch of buffs that try to make the game harder, but all they end up doing is making the game even less fun to play. I added this horrible flashlight buff, made useless ambience louder just to drown out sound cues, made cameras randomly not work, make vents randomly fail when being sealed, made alarms randomly not work, made Jihawk even more RNG, and made the night 8 minutes. Adding baseless RNG just to make a game harder is not the right way to do it. I wanted to meet some sort of quota by adding these buffs to make the game as hard as I possibly could, and then I just completely left it for someone else to beat it for me. And surprise, surprise, nobody has, because nobody wants to play this horrible game. The way that these characters themselves worked wasn't even good either. You see, in classic FNaF games, characters will run on their own timers. Once this timer is over, the character will roll a random number. If this number is lower than the AI of the character, they will move. This makes it so that the lower the AI of the character, the smaller room for a movement there is, and so the chance to move becomes drastically smaller. This is bad for a multitude of reasons. If you're making a skill-based game, you don't really want to rely on a random chance for a character to do something. For example, if a character has a 50% chance to leave your office, they can theoretically fail every chance to leave your office and just stay there forever. Instead, what people do is a bit different. The character still rolls a timer that starts within the range of 2 numbers. The higher the AI, the lower these numbers are, and thus the timer runs out a lot faster. Then, when the timer runs out, the character will always move. This means even if you had the character at 1 AI, they are still guaranteed to move, even though it would take much longer than if it was on 20 AI. Of course, when I made this game, I wasn't really knowledgeable on how skill-based games work. This, in turn, sealed the fate of this game not receiving much positive feedback. Every failure is a learning opportunity. When one of the people who criticized my game suggested I make a reboot of it, I jumped onto the opportunity. This time, I would make the game as balanced and fun to play as I could. And after over 2 months of planning, I started work on my biggest project yet, Thunder's Frenzy Recoded. Thunder's Frenzy Recoded is a game that aims to completely redo every mistake I made in the original version. The menu, aesthetic, overall look of the game, and most importantly, gameplay are all completely overhauled. First off, there's no need for this main menu screen. Instead, you're brought to the custom night upon opening the game. As you can tell, this custom night menu is a lot cleaner than the original. I'll explain how everything in this menu works later, but for now, let's talk about what's different in terms of gameplay. Firstly, the office scrolling is a lot smoother, and the game's quality is simply better. On top of all of that, all of the camera renders have been completely redone, and all of the rooms no longer look absolutely lifeless. The camera layout is a bit different. 2 cameras have been added and there are these icons all around. You see, in the old game, each camera had some sort of action you can do to deal with specific characters. Each camera's action all had E as the keybind, and it made doing these actions not stand out at all and made the gameplay loop a bit more boring. This time, when you click on the camera next to a button, the button will light up and you'll be able to click it. Each camera has its own action. Cameras 3 and 4 have a button to place a cake down. Cameras 5 and 6 have an alarm that can be played, and cameras 7 and 8 have a flashbang. Character mechanics in the old game were fine in concept, but I implemented them in such a bad way. In this game, most of the characters have the exact same mechanic, just coded differently. So let's go over how each character is different. Thunder will switch sides every 4.5 to 5.5 seconds. He'll also have another counter of 5.4 to 10.2 seconds. Once this timer hits 0 and his footstep sounds are not playing, Thunder will enter a vent and play the quiet vent sound. If the vent on that side is not sealed by the time the sound is over, a louder vent sound will play, and if this happens, you die. In the original game, you sealed the vents by pressing Q and W. Not only are these keybinds really awkward to get used to, there's also this crossing in the vents here, meaning you have to press the opposite keybind of the side Thunder's at. Now, you just have to select the camera Thunder's on and click it again to seal the vent. You even get this nice little indicator as well. Firework and Fan were an absolute pain to deal with in the original game. Instead of waiting for each other before restarting their cycle in the hallway, they restarted whenever they want. This made them super buggy and in general a pain to deal with. They would even get stuck sometimes. There was a cycle you could use to deal with them, but their mechanic was overall not made well. This time, they will always start synced up in the back hallway. If you use the alarm on one side, that character just gets deleted. Then you wait for the other character to get to your door and you close it. Much simpler, but it plays way better. Jonathan in the original game was pretty bad. I'm not sure why I didn't make him bonk on the door. Instead, I made him play this voice line as an indicator of him leaving the door. This time, Jonathan will progress out of his cove and will have 5 stages of progression. Peeking out, right outside the curtain, looking to the right, looking at the camera, and gone. Once he's gone, he'll be in one of the hallway cameras peeking around his doorway. Close the door on that side to make him leave. Now, choosing a random side to attack is cool and all, but having to look at where he is kinda sucks. But there is a way to predict where he's going using his curtains. If the curtain is more opened on the left side, he's attacking the left side. And if the curtain is more open on the right side, he's attacking the right side. Jonathan will give you a default of 2 seconds to close the door on him, which is super fast. Thankfully, you can increase this by watching him. If you watch his camera from stages 2 to 4, you get that much more time to close the door on him with a limit of 6 seconds. This means if you watch him for as long as you can, Jonathan will give you 8 seconds to shut the door on him. Fobear has also been heavily simplified, but in a really good way. Every 4 to 12 seconds, he'll appear on either cams 3 or 4, making this sound cue.
Cake time! Woo!
Then, after 9 to 14 seconds, he will appear in your office on either the left or right side. If he appears on the left side, place a cake on cam 3, and if he appears on the right side, place a cake on cam 4. Note that whichever camera Fobear appears in is the camera you have to place the cake in. His mechanic is pretty simple, but gets more complex as we'll soon come to see. Aiden will always be in a camera opposite from Thunder. Every 6 to 10 seconds, he'll attack the camera and start draining your lights. He gives you 3.5 seconds to flashbang him on the cameras. One slight issue with this is that Thunder can still switch sides even if Aiden is attacking, moving Aiden away and moving Thunder towards that camera. This is bad because flashbanging Thunder will get you killed. However, Thunder gives a 1 second grace period when this happens and he won't kill you. This does mean you still have to flashbang Aiden on the other side, but luckily this resets the cooldown for the flashbang, so at least there's that. Goldie has by far the biggest change to his mechanic in this game. In the original game, he was very memory based. In this game, he's very reaction based. Goldie will have a cooldown of 7 to 10 seconds. Once this cooldown is over, Goldie will spawn the next time you flip your cams down, making this sound. You'll notice that his eyes will light up and there will be 3 colors displayed on your monitors. All you have to do is click the monitor that matches the color of his eyes. If you click the wrong one, Goldie powers you out and you can't use your cams or the doors. If you don't click anything after 2.5 seconds, you die. You might also notice these symbols on his chest and the monitors. These match the colors anyway, and they're just there if you're colorblind or struggling to see the colors. I'm always looking out for everyone. Ultra's mechanic is very similar to his old one aside his insta-kill. Ultra will randomly move back and forth behind you and will eventually get right up to your door, indicated by the loudness of his music. Once he does this, he'll knock on that side. Shut the door when this happens to make him go away. Very simple. G will have a cooldown of 5 to 18 seconds. Once this cooldown is over, he will send a cupcake at you the next time you drop your cams. It can go across your screen from left to right, right to left, and even upside down. Click the cupcake to make it go away. If you fail to do so, he will disable your doors for 7 seconds. The cupcake hitbox is a bit weird and looks like this. Sometimes it feels like you just clicked the cupcake and it's not registering. Just aim for the frosting and you'll be fine. Finally, G-Hawk is still like Golden Freddy. In the previous game though, G-Hawk could spawn if you use the cameras for too long and will forcefully pull them down if you don't deal with him. This time, he doesn't do that. G-Hawk will appear in your office after you flip cams with a cooldown of 3 to 5 seconds. If you don't flip up your cams to get rid of him by 1.5 seconds, you die. All of the numbers were how the characters worked on 20 AI, meaning on lower AIs, the characters are much easier. Now, this is still a completely different game than the original, and there's a big chance you haven't played the original going into this game. Not that I'd recommend it. So let me give you a brief overview on how this game's mechanics work, and how you can beat the Tricky 10 challenge, where every character is set to 20 AI. Firstly, the doors in your office can be closed by using the A and D keys on your keyboard, which will close the door on the respective side. There are a few key details about the doors that should be mentioned, however. The doors don't use power, so instead they have to be held shut by pressing and holding the respective keybinds. On top of that, only one door can be closed at a time, so you can't close both doors at once, and you can't close doors while you're on the cameras. This is done because dropping your cameras wouldn't be useful in the slightest otherwise. After all, if there's no power value that the cameras can drain, what's stopping you from just camping the cameras the whole night? This door mechanic makes it so you have to drop your cams for the doors, but this means you could just spend most of the game on the cameras. Well, don't worry, because I made this game super camera heavy. So let's talk about how you can go about beating Tricky 10, the easiest max mode in this game. You want to start the night by immediately going on cams and sealing the side Thunder ran to. Then wait for the hallway Bonnies to appear and use the alarm on one side to send that character away. You might be asking yourself if getting both characters to your door would just be easier than always remembering to use the alarm. After all, why can't you just let both of them attack your door? Well, there's a big problem with that. You might be thinking that if both characters get to your doors at the same time, you could just shut the door on each side. But I said before how only one door can be closed at a time, meaning if you close off the door for one character, the other will always get in. This makes it so you have to use the alarm on the cameras, and if they both get to your doors at the same time, the run is dead. Many FNaF challenges have some sort of cycle or interval system that you can follow with a timer to make it easier. This game does not have that. A timer is basically completely useless, and I already built a timer into the night anyway. This means that you just need to react to every character's attacks and deal with whoever appears first. Remembering Fober's camera is helpful, but you can always just look at which side of the office he's on. Aiden is always opposite Thunder, so it helps to remember to flashbang the camera that's opposite of the sealed vent. If all of the door characters attack at once, it's smart to deal with Firework or Fan first, since they have the shortest kill timers. Then deal with Ultra, and then Jonathan, assuming you watch his camera for enough time. With enough playing the game and enough practice, Tricky 10 goes down quite easily. All in all, the characters with their base mechanics are not too hard to deal with. Tricky 10 on average doesn't take long for most people, and it only took me like 3 attempts to beat. From looking at the menu though, you might notice some extra things. What is Hopeless mode? Why is there an extra preset under Tricky 10? Is there another max mode other than Tricky 10? Well, as it turns out, Tricky 10 barely scratches the surface when it comes to this game's hardest challenges. So let me introduce you to Thunder's Wrath. It wouldn't be of typical fashion of me to make a game without buffs. That's right. I basically re-implemented the buff system from the old game. But don't worry, this one's actually good. Instead of having a menu on the right side where all of the buffs are, each character has their own separate aggressive mode. The Thunder's Wrath challenge is basically every character set to 20 with their aggressive mode enabled. This makes Thunder's Wrath quite a bit harder than Tricky 10. Okay, that's cool and all, but what are each character's aggressive buffs? Well, let's get into those. First is Thunder and Aiden. I'm grouping them together because their mechanics work in unison. Thunder and Aiden's aggressive mode makes them both invisible on the cameras. This means the only way to track them and know where they both are is by listening to Thunder's footsteps. I also made it so if you successfully use the flashbang on Aiden, he'll briefly appear on the cameras as an indicator that you got him. If you flashbang a camera and he doesn't appear, you're likely dead to Thunder. Other than that, both of the characters work the same. Firework and Fan are a bit more similar to the original game. This time, when you use the alarm on one side, that character no longer gets completely deleted from the camera. Instead, they get offset by one stage and will be behind the other character. This means you have to use the alarm on one side, delaying that character, then close the door on the other side once the door creaking happens, and then close the door on the side you use the alarm on. Having to deal with both characters at the doors doesn't seem like a big change, but it makes the mode a lot more hectic. Jonathan's buff makes him a lot more of a threat in this mode. Jonathan will now always start on stage 2, right outside his curtain. This makes him attack much more frequently. On top of that, he has some other things changed with his kill timer. Remember how I said you can watch Jonathan to buy yourself some time to close the door on him? Well, his aggressive mode makes it so that if you're not watching his camera, his kill timer slowly creeps back down to 0. This means you have to take extra care in watching his camera. Faubear still works exactly how he did before, but this time you have to be watching him in the office after you place a cake to make him fully go away. If you place the cake for him, but you don't watch him in the office, his kill timer still counts down, but slower. This means you can have the cake placed, but if you aren't watching him in the office, you can still die. Goldie works exactly how he did before, but he has a chance to do this.
I hope you enjoyed my
Okay, what just happened? None of the monitors in the office matched his eye color. This is Goldie's aggressive mode attack. On aggressive mode, Goldie's office sprite has a hitbox. Clicking on this hitbox normally powers you out, but if Goldie does this special attack where his eye color does not match any of the monitors, you have to click on him to make him leave. This is really good at throwing you off. Ultra has by far the most simple buff to his mechanic. He works exactly how he did before, but this time his knock doesn't pan to the side he's attacking from. Pretty simple. G now sends 2 cupcakes after you, one on the top and another one on the bottom. One of these will always be a normal cupcake, and the other one will be slightly discolored, appearing a bit more red. If you click this discolored cupcake, it will disable your doors for 7 seconds, and it's basically the same thing as missing the real cupcake. G-Hawk now has another mechanic on the cameras. He will still be in the office, but he can also show up on a random camera. If you watch this camera for too long, he progresses. He will have 3 stages of progression before completely disabling your cameras. So basically, you can't avoid him in the office or on cameras. One thing to note is that G-Hawk can never appear on Jonathan's cam on camera 9. This means you can always watch Jonathan's camera and always be safe from G-Hawk. Now, one thing that's a bit unfortunate about every character's aggressive mode is that it doesn't change much of the gameplay. Jonathan makes this mode much harder, along with Firework and Fan adding a bit more requirement for speed. Thunder and Aiden now make this mode much more memory based, but it's super easy to get good at tracking them. This is something that I didn't plan much for. Sure, I planned this game out for 2 months before I started coding, and I'm still adding changes to the game. But the point is, I didn't consider how much harder these changes would make the mode. And the unfortunate part is that most of these buffs don't really make the mode all that much harder. With that being said, there isn't even a proper strategy for this mode. Like Tricky 10, this mode doesn't have any intervals or cycles to help cheese characters, but I can give some tips on how to easily go about beating this mode, since I think I'm qualified enough to do that. I only made the game after all. Thunder's Wrath might look scary, but the core gameplay is almost identical to that of Tricky 10, so if you can beat that mode, you can easily beat Thunder's Wrath. You want to start out the night by immediately closing Thunder's vent, and then use the alarm on Firework or Fan. I usually like to use the alarm on the left side, but it's up to preference. You can sometimes use the alarm on the side Jonathan is attacking. This way, the second character can sometimes line up with Jonathan's attack, and you could close them both at the same time. If Thunder ever goes into a vent, it's good to close the opposite side as soon as he leaves the vent. This is because Thunder can never go into the same vent twice in a row. Then camp the opposite side for Aiden and flashbang him when he attacks. In this game, you basically want to camp the cameras and only drop into the office when you need to close the doors. This does mean that if you spend too much time on the cameras, every office character will just spawn at once. If this is too overwhelming, you can do what I like to call the reset force. Basically, this technique boils down to this. If I know that a bunch of characters are about to attack my doors, I can drop cameras early and force every office character to spawn. Once I deal with them, their timers will all be on cooldown by the time everyone attacks my doors, and thus I don't have to be overwhelmed with both office and door characters. One thing to note with Jonathan is that he can be very fast if you don't watch him. You want to always prioritize watching his camera, especially on his aggressive, since its timer counts down to 0. Basically, whenever you're not doing anything else, you want to always be watching Jonathan's camera. Like I said, there's no cycle and there are no intervals, so timers are basically useless outside of knowing where you are in the night. This of course means that the only way you can master this mode is by practicing and getting better at character combos. I've seen so many people get comboed by office and door characters and ending up misclicking Goldie or getting some other stupid death. This mode shouldn't take long and overall isn't super difficult, but of course, like I said before, this barely scratches the surface of this game's challenges. So, I think it's finally time we talk about the elephant in the room. What is hopeless mode? Well, let me show you.
You're a really good cake.
Hopeless Hopeless mode is an extra option you can turn on to make these challenges even harder. You see, there's another game called Five Nights at Treasure Island but Dumb that does something similar. This game has a silent mode option, and when turned on, the gameplay changes quite a bit. Every in-game hour from 1 AM onwards, an ominous buff sequence plays and 3 of the 15 characters get buffed for around 30 seconds. These buffs range from making their mechanics slightly more strict to completely reworking their gameplay. This repeats until 5 AM, where every single character is buffed. If you couldn't tell, Thunder's Frenzy is heavily inspired by this game, and I definitely plan on making a video about it soon. Now, Hopeless mode is very similar to this, but has some major differences. Every in-game hour after 12, a similar buff sequence plays out, but only 2 of the characters become buffed. And this is just because of the fact that we're now working with only 10 characters. The key difference here is that once a character becomes buffed, they stay buffed for the whole night instead of just 30 seconds. This makes Hopeless mode much more difficult, as instead of only dealing with a character's buff for a certain amount of time, you're dealing with them for the whole rest of the night. This also means that as the night goes on, the gameplay gets increasingly harder, and by 5 AM, every single character will be buffed. So with that being said, what are each character's buffs? Before, I talked about characters in the order of them appearing on the custom night roster, but I decided to change things up a bit and list the buffs in increasing order. That way we save the most insane buffs for last. First is G, the easiest buff. Remember how I talked about his aggressive giving him the ability to send a fake discolored cupcake? Well, now he can send out a fake cupcake whenever he wants, even if he's not on aggressive. This basically means that G can sometimes choose to fake you out and send a cupcake that you don't have to click on. On top of that, G won't wait until your monitor is down to send a cupcake, and he'll instead send it randomly whenever he wants. Next is G-Hawk. G-Hawk is now much more unavoidable. When he's buffed and you flip up your monitor to clear him, he won't leave your office. I forgot to mention before that when G-Hawk is in your office, his eyes can be used as a visual indicator for his kill timer. The more faded in they are, the closer G-Hawk is to killing you. On Hopeless mode, he will never leave your office. His kill timer has been extended, and when you flip up the cameras, it gets immediately reset back to its cap. The reason he is so low is because this mode is very camera heavy anyway, so you won't really find yourself dropping cams all that much. But if you think you're safe on cams, think again. Instead of appearing on only one camera, G-Hawk can now appear in 3 different cameras. This of course is assuming that his aggressive mode is enabled. Since you can still camp cam 9, this isn't too bad either. Next on the list is Thunder. Remember on the aggressive guide how I said Thunder's invisibility quirk makes him much more memory based? Well, Thunder's buff is that he no longer has directional footsteps. I know, but there are 2 reasons why this buff is also pretty low. One being the fact that you constantly have to flashbang Aiden, which pretty much reinforces your memory, and you always know where Thunder is because of that. If Aiden wasn't enabled alongside Thunder, this buff would be a bit harder. You can also use the vent seal to basically track where he is, since vents will always stay sealed unless Thunder unseals them or you decide to seal the other vent. You can also kind of cheese his footsteps in a way. Both sides use a different audio file, and they both sound like this. Notice how the left side's footsteps are slightly more frequent? With enough playing this game, this becomes easy to distinguish. Overall, this buff still isn't easy per se, but there are much harder buffs. Next is Aiden. Aiden's buff doesn't change much alongside needing more inputs to deal with him. This is because when Aiden gets buffed, every time you flashbang him, he will make a mad dash to the opposite side and he'll begin to start another attack there. If Thunder is on that side, Aiden will force him into a vent and Thunder won't be able to get out until Aiden is gone. This seems great until you realize you only have about 5.5 seconds to flash him again. This only makes it so you have to be quick with Aiden and Thunder, but it's super easy to forget that you have to flash the other side for Aiden, as if you normally did that, you die. Next we have Goldie. I debated on putting Goldie this high, but I realized that learning his buff is pretty difficult. Once Goldie is buffed, his office sprite will always be visible. If Goldie ever attacks and you happen to flip up your monitor, the next time you flip your cams down, Goldie will laugh and reshuffle his eye color and colors on the monitors. This makes previous habits and muscle memory really easy to mess you up. What I would always do is drop cams, notice Goldie's eye color, and match it with the monitor. Then I would flip the cams up or down for G-Hawk and then immediately click the monitor. But now, since the colors reshuffle, that strategy doesn't work anymore, and you have to react to this. There are a few things about this that are really important that I should note. If Goldie is on aggressive, his colors will always reshuffle, but his attack type doesn't. What I mean by this is if Goldie does an attack where you have to click on one of the monitors, then if he reshuffles, you will still always be required to click the monitors and vice versa. Meaning if Goldie's eye colors don't match the monitors, they won't match the monitors if he reshuffles and you'll still be required to click him. Yeah, I'm sure you get why I said this buff is not easy to learn. Next we have Firework and Fan. Because they're both the same character, just on opposite sides of each other, it wouldn't make sense to give them each separate buff mechanic. The hallway cameras where they appear will now have this weird pixelated distortion, and it will appear on a random side. This distortion means if you use the alarm on that side, nothing will happen, basically forcing you to use it on the side without the distortion. Because the cooldown of the alarms are tied to each other, if you use the alarm on the wrong side, you're basically as good as dead. It's really hard to remember to do this, and it goes against muscle memory quite a lot. These last three characters are what the community has coined the Big Three. These are the three hardest characters in this mode, and if you have a run where these three get buffed early on, well, good luck. First is Fauxbear, the third hardest character in this mode and the cause for many of my deaths. Fauxbear does two extra things. Firstly, he will instantly appear in the hallway. Then he'll choose to either stay on that side or switch sides, making his sound cue. Then he'll appear in your office. This isn't too difficult though, since you only have to check him after this sound cue. But I did say he's the third hardest character. Well, Fauxbear has a second addition, which makes him absolutely insane. Before, Fauxbear will appear on either the left side or the right side of your office. This made him super easy because you didn't really have to remember which camera he was on, since you can always just look at his office sprite. Now, Fauxbear will appear in the back corner of your office here, regardless of which side he was on. This means you have to remember which camera he was on. On top of this, if you misplace the cake and instead place it on the opposite camera of where you're supposed to place it, you can't correct this mistake and you will always die. The second hardest buff is easily Jonathan. Jonathan is a character that can really catch you by surprise, even if it's not hopeless mode. If you aren't looking at him very frequently, it seems like he could just sprint right to your door. In this challenge, you don't really get the time to look at him as much, making him quite a bit more difficult. On top of this, Jonathan's buff makes him even harder. I mentioned before how you can use Jonathan's curtain to tell which side he's attacking. If it's open on the left, he's attacking the left door and vice versa. Well, this is still the case. However, after watching Jonathan for 3 seconds, a certain flag gets triggered, and the next time you're watching his camera, both of the curtains will be open. This means you have to memorize which side he's attacking. You might be wondering though, can't you just check the hallway cameras to see which side he's on when he attacks? Well, this doesn't work anymore, because Jonathan is now invisible in the hallway cameras. Yeah. The reason Jonathan isn't ranked all the way at the top is because watching him makes his kill timer super lenient, meaning you have time to close both doors and deal with him in both cases. Finally, we have Ultra, what most people think is the hardest character in this mode. Ultra's kill timer after knocking on both doors has been raised to 4.4 seconds, which seems good, right? The problem is that it's now up to you how much time he gives you. His music will now audibly get slower and slower. The slower the music, the shorter his kill timer. His kill timer can decrease all the way down to 1 frame. So how do we stop this? Up to this point, cameras 1 and 2 have been completely useless. Clicking these cameras will now wind up his music box and fill his timer back up. You can only wind his music box when he's audibly off to one side, so cam 1 on the left and cam 2 on the right. One thing to note is when Ultra gets to stage 4, where his music goes silent and he's about to attack, his kill timer cannot decrease, but it can still be tuned. So do with that information what you will. Ultra becomes one more thing you have to pay attention to, making you constantly wind up his box, and that's why people view him as the hardest character on a hopeless mode. So this mode is quite difficult, and it can be pretty chaotic as well. Since character buffs never go away, you can get really unlucky and get the hardest buffs at the start of the night, or you can get really lucky and get those buffs at the end of your run. To be honest, because of this randomness with the way that stuff happens, it's really hard to practice this mode, but luckily I thought of this. There's a version of the game called Thunder's Frenzy Recoded Unlocked. This is basically a version of the game with a practice mode. Each character can have their hopeless buff enabled in the menu, and you can practice certain buff combinations, and even 5 AM where every character is buffed. Of course, I'll leave links to everything in the description, and I highly recommend you check these games out. After all, I spent the last 4 to 5 months of my life on them, and it's the whole reason that I'm making this video. Now, hopeless mode wasn't always like this. This game has changed a lot, including hopeless mode, and I do want to talk about every previous version in a sort of devlog section later. There there are still a few extra challenges I want to talk about. You might be wondering, more challenges? Didn't you already manage to squeeze every ounce of possible ideas into this game? Well, not really. You see, this game wasn't planned in the first place. I wanted to get the original Thunder's Frenzy out and just be done with it, never touch the game after that. But I felt like, in a way, I let the small amount of people following the game down. The few people who did end up playing it all expressed how much they didn't really like the game, and in hindsight, I should have seen it too. At the time, I was so overtaken by pride that I just didn't listen to these criticisms, and mainly because I just didn't want to work on the game anymore. After a few months though, it really started to set in just how much potential the game had, and just how little of it was actually utilized. It really upset me, so I brought together a couple of players who were originally giving feedback on the game. I offered them to come up with ideas for a potential remake of the game, and they seemed to be pretty excited. And interestingly enough, some of these ideas were really good. Some that I didn't even think about. And during this planning, one specific idea came up that I debated on adding for the longest time. Extreme mode. Extreme mode was essentially a complete other layer of difficulty that would be added on top of hopeless mode. But at first, I was really iffy about the idea. A lot of FNaF games try to make their hardest challenges as hard as humanly possible. And of course, inevitably when this happens, the challenge just becomes really tedious, almost unplayable. Sure, it's difficult, but people won't enjoy playing it, and I didn't really want that. But I realized that I can make the challenge work how I wanted it to. There are still many really difficult challenges that people do enjoy playing, and if I could do that, if I could just make my challenge the perfect balance of difficult but fun. As a game developer, this is really, really difficult to do. Surely it would be too much. After what making the old game put me through, surely I wouldn't make this. Extreme mode creates what is by far the hardest challenge so far. It is miles above hopeless mode and it's not even close. Let me put things into perspective. In extreme mode, every single character's buff from hopeless mode is on for the whole night. This means that a run on extreme mode is basically 5 AM of hopeless mode, but for the whole night instead of just the last hour. But if you think that's it, well, I haven't even gotten started. Extreme mode adds a whole other layer of buffs to every character. Think of hopeless mode, but 5 times harder. Here's the thing with extreme mode. Every character's extreme buff is basically meant to be an addition to hopeless, meaning the level of difficulty per character starts out with their normal mechanic, then their aggressive mechanic, which can be toggled on and off whenever, then they have their hopeless mode buff, then they have their hopeless mode and their extreme mode. Some characters' extreme mode buff is literally just a harder version of their hopeless mode. But there are some characters that have a completely new buff reworking their gameplay. Okay, I think I've stalled long enough, so let me explain what every character's extreme mode buff is. I'll read them out in the same way I read out the hopeless mode buffs, leaving the most insane ones for last. First, we have Jihawk. In hopeless mode, Jihawk's buff is that he's permanently in your office and is basically a constant threat. When you flip up your cameras, Jihawk's timer instantly resets back to his cap. On extreme mode, this isn't the case anymore. Jihawk's kill timer has been nerfed to 4 seconds, which is good. But here's the problem. The kill timer doesn't reset when you're on cams, but instead it fills back up. What I mean by this is if you're in the office for 2 seconds, you have to go on cameras for that amount of time to fully refill his kill timer. The one thing that doesn't make this that bad is that Jihawk's kill timer fills up slightly faster than it drains. So even if you watched him for 2 seconds in the office, you only have to be on cams for about 1.6 seconds to fully fill his kill timer back up. The reason this buff is so low is because it's not really as bad as it sounds and there are much harder characters. Next is Thunder. Thunder's buff is that if he ever enters an unsealed vent, he will instantly get through. This sounds really bad, but here's the thing. The buff description says it's instant, but there is this really tiny grace period where you can quickly close the vent. The instant the vent is closed, however, Thunder will immediately crawl back out and will be ready to run to the other side. One thing that you might notice is Thunder instantly leaves the vent when it's sealed, but the vent sound continues to play. This is only done as an indicator that he went into the vent, since Thunder on his full difficulty can be pretty confusing. This buff sounds bad at first, but it's actually really lenient, only adding a tiny bit of difficulty, so that's why it's ranked so low. Next is G. G's buff is that he can sometimes appear inside of your office just staring at you. When this happens, it means that G has hidden one of his cupcakes on the cameras. The cupcake can appear on the screen in one of these three corners here. Be careful though, because every other camera besides the one the cupcake is in will have the fake discolored ones. These can't be clicked on and are just there to throw you off. If you fail to find the cupcake in time, G himself will jump scare you, making this the only time you ever die to G. G gives you more than enough time to find the cupcake even on 20 AI, and since you're always on cams, this isn't actually too bad. Next we have Goldie. In hopeless mode, Goldie can reshuffle his eye color when the cameras are pulled up. Also, his office sprite will always be visible in your office. This time though, not only is his office sprite always visible, but Goldie will always be attacking. Clicking the monitor will only reshuffle his colors and reset his kill timer. This sounds insane, but it's not actually that bad. Goldie's kill timer has been extended quite a bit. This means that you only really have to deal with him when you drop cams to do stuff in the office. Some might call this a nerf rather than a buff, but it can be super overwhelming when this happens, since he's a constant threat. So that's why he isn't at the bottom of the list. Next is Firework and Fan, easily one of the more confusing buffs. In hopeless mode, one camera will have a pixelated distortion effect, and this means that the alarm is useless on that side. I should note that unless you're on extreme mode, Fan will always attack from the left side and Firework will always attack from the right side, but when they're buffed, they have a chance to switch sides with each other, Firework being on the left and Fan being on the right. This is basically a fake out attack. Normally, you would avoid using the alarm on the side with the distortion, but if they switch sides like this, the alarm has the opposite effect as well. This means you have to use the alarm on the side with the distortion, but only when they switch sides. This can really throw you off and it's pretty hard to get used to. Next we have Aiden. Aiden's buff is simple, but it makes him so much harder. When Aiden attacks, he has some downtime before his kill timer starts counting down and the lights begin to fade. On extreme mode, this downtime is extended, but Aiden will literally always be attacking. This means you have to flash him constantly and it just adds to the chaos of this mode. Okay, remember the big three in hopeless mode? Well, they're back now, and they're angrier than ever. These three characters are absolutely insane in this mode. So let's start with our third hardest character. Jonathan on hopeless mode forced you to remember which side he was on, since if you watch his camera for a bit, both curtains will be open. This time, Jonathan not only forces you to remember which side he's attacking, but also prevents you from cheesing his attack by closing both doors. This time, you have to be on the hallway camera that he's attacking. If you're not selecting his hallway camera and you close the door, he's just gonna camp that hallway. Now sure, you can still cheese this by choosing one side, closing the door, and quickly switch cameras and closing the other door. But there's so much going on in this mode that you don't really have time for that. There's no sugarcoating it. This buff is hard, but it's not the hardest. The second hardest buff is Ultra. Ultra's kill timer has been extended to 7 seconds. This is really good compared to the previous 4.4. Here's the thing, because of the music box winding mechanic, this means you have to click slightly more than before to get his kill timer all the way up to 7 seconds. On top of this, Ultra will knock on one side and then immediately switch sides once you clear him and knock on the other side. When he does this, his kill timer doesn't reset, but you still have 7 seconds to work with. What's the big deal? Why is Ultra so high? Well, there's one other trick up his sleeve that only happens when his aggressive buff is enabled. You see, extreme mode can only be accessed if you're playing Thunder's Wrath. That is if you're not playing on unlocked. This means characters' aggressive buffs are guaranteed to be enabled on extreme. There are two characters that have a unique extra buff when their aggressive and extreme buffs are enabled, Ultra and Jihawk. Jihawk's is that he appears on every single camera besides camera 9. This makes him a constant threat everywhere, in the office and on the cameras. Ultra's is a little bit unique. Ultra's hidden buff is that he now punishes you for not tuning the music box all the way. So for example, if Ultra knocks on the door but his kill timer is at, say, 6 seconds instead of 7, this becomes the new limit for the kill timer. After that, you cannot raise the kill timer past 6 seconds. So the more you neglect Ultra, the more of a threat he becomes. And remember, he can be as fast as 1 frame, and since on extreme he attacks both doors, that is literally an insta-kill. Of course, I had to save the hardest buff for last. The hardest character in this mode is by far Fauxbear. In hopeless mode, Fauxbear appears at the back of the office. This makes it impossible to see which side he's on without using the cameras. Also, his hopeless mode made him instantly return back to one of the hallway cameras after being dealt with. Then, after some time, he'll choose to stay on that side or switch sides. Well, now you have to fully pay attention to everything. On extreme mode, Fober is slower, but he will require you to place 2 cakes. One of them corresponding to the side he was on when he appeared in the hallway, and the second cake corresponding to the side he was on after his sound cue. So, for example, if he was on the left but then switched sides to the right, the next time he appears in your office, you have to place a cake on the left side first, and then place it on the right. And since you can't tell which side he's on in the office, you have to remember all of this. Misplace the cake once, and your run is over. Now, there is one thing I should note about the way his buff takes effect. You see, if Fober is mid-attack when he gets buffed, his buff will only come into play after he's done with that attack. So, as you can tell, extreme mode is insanely difficult, not even comparable to the original game. But don't worry, if you think you have to deal with all of these buffs for the entirety of the night, well, you don't have to. For now. This mode is similar to Hopeless mode, how only some buffs get activated at a time. This time at 12 AM, yes, the literal second you load the night, 2 characters will be buffed. They will then stay buffed for the remainder of that hour. Then at 1 AM, they stop being buffed and instead 2 other characters get buffed. This then repeats until 5 AM. At 5 AM, all extreme buffs are disabled, and a buff sequence will play out where every single character gets buffed, and they will then stay buffed for the remainder of the night. So this mode is basically exactly like Silent Mode from Treasure Island, but dumb. Now, while I really do want to make a strategy portion for this challenge, there is really no strategy. All of the modes up to this point have been beaten before. Thunder's Wrath on Extreme Mode has not been beaten yet, so I can't really give a strategy for this mode. All I can really say is, if you want to practice this mode, do it on Unlocked. Unlocked also has individual toggle for Extreme Mode, making it super easy to practice different buff combos. You can also play with everyone's buffs automatically enabled if you want to practice 5 AM. This is called Eternal Mode. Wait a minute. Eternal mode? You're saying there's a challenge where every single character has every buff they can possibly have enabled for the entire duration of the night? Well... Eternal mode is difficult. Like, really difficult, miles above extreme. Now, to be honest, there isn't much to be said about it. There aren't any new buffs exclusive to the mode. It's just every character at their hardest difficulty, with every possible buff enabled for the whole night. And if you couldn't tell, this is really difficult. My recorded personal best time is only about 45 seconds, and this challenge is so hard, it's expected to place in the top 10 on the main list of the max mode list. That would make this challenge harder than the one I talked about in the previous video. Eternal mode is something I debated on adding for the longest time. As a matter of fact, Eternal mode only came out in a recent update. You see, this update restricted Extreme mode to only be playable on the Thunder's Wrath challenge, and it added Eternal mode, which is also only restricted to Thunder's Wrath. Of course, you can access Extreme and Eternal whenever you want on Unlocked. Now, this begs the question, why didn't I just make an Extreme and Eternal mode available on any preset in the full game? After all, I wouldn't have had to made Unlocked if I did that. Well, the main reason was just because I didn't want the list cluttered with a bunch of modes from this game. Besides, only 5 of the hardest challenges can place from any game, so the ones that could place from this game would make a really bad lineup. This game, including every single challenge from Unlocked, has 10 max modes. That's a lot. I made everything accessible in Unlocked, that way it wouldn't be able to place on the main list since it's technically a mod of the game, but it would still allow you to practice every mode. Like I said before, this game had many versions. The way the modes play now wasn't always the way it was. Many aggressive buffs were swapped out for other buffs. For example, Jonathan's aggressive buff used to be his extreme. Fober's aggressive buff used to be his hopeless buff. Jihawk's aggressive buff was planned to be really stupid, but thankfully that was never implemented. Goldie's extreme didn't really change his gameplay too much and made him appear whenever. Ultra's aggressive buff was planned to be just like his old mechanic from the original game with the fake knocks, but thankfully that never happened. Aiden's extreme buff used to rely on Thunder being active, and changed absolutely nothing if he wasn't. Having a character buff that relies on having another character active is kind of bad, and thankfully that's not the case anymore. Also, Hopeless mode and extreme mode weren't always how they are now. Like I said before, Extreme and Eternal is only accessible on Thunder's Wrath. But before I added Extreme mode, you could use your keyboard to type out so hard on the menu to enable Extreme mode. The way that buffs were added in Hopeless and Extreme mode were completely swapped. Extreme mode used to have the stacking buffs gameplay that Hopeless mode does, and Hopeless mode used to play like Silent mode with the random buffs that swap with each other, just like the current Extreme mode. This made Extreme mode much harder than Hopeless. And I mean 10 times harder. I never really liked this difficulty imbalance, and essentially Extreme mode wasn't too much different from Eternal mode, so a while after I added Eternal mode, and I swapped the way that Hopeless and Extreme mode work. So yeah, this game has gone through many changes, and I said before that I planned this game for almost 2 months before actually working on it. This goes to show that planning a project is everything. I didn't plan this much with the original Thunder's Frenzy, and it shows. I've said pretty much everything I wanted to say about this game. It's a major step up from the original, and people seem to really like it. Once again, I highly recommend you to check it out. Before I end this video though, there are a few things I want to say. First and foremost, this video isn't necessarily a guide. Sure, I go over mechanics of characters, but it wasn't super in-depth. So I have two options to give you. Option 1 is that I make a follow-up video going over every character's AI in full detail. Option 2 is that I make a document going over every inch of the game. I do plan on making this document, and if I do, I'll post it to my Discord server. That's right, I have a Discord server. The only people in it right now are close friends and testers of the game. So if you want to give suggestions for the game, upcoming videos, sneak peeks, or if you just want to talk to me and my community, I'd highly recommend you to join the server, linked in the description. I want to thank everyone who has helped me in some way with this project. Everything up to this point would not have been possible, and this game would not be up, so it means a lot to me. Also, I want to thank all of you guys. You're the reason that I can make these videos and projects in the first place. And I have a lot of stuff planned in the future. If you enjoyed this video, and you really enjoy these types of videos, then make sure to subscribe. I plan on doing some special things in the future. But for now, that is everything I have for you. This video took so long to make, and that's why I've been gone for so long. Now that I'm finally done with the game, I can do other things for you guys. That'll be it for now, and I'll see you in another video.